Hello and welcome to Cheers to Fears, where we take horror films and turn them into drinking games. We're your two hosts. I'm Tucker.
And I'm Alex. Today we will be making a drinking game for The Editor, directed by Adam Brooks, who also plays Ray, the editor, as well as Matthew Kennedy, who plays Pete the investigator. The movie is written by Brooks, Kennedy, and Connor Sweeney, who played a character in the film named Cal. The movie was suggested to us by a friend in the horror community, Horror Flicks with Nick. He's consistently uploading quality content, so we recommend you check out his channel.
Ray was a famous film editor that is not as good as he used to be because of an accident that took his fingers. While still a fairly good editor, he finds work on the set of an upcoming film. However, things take a dark turn when members of the cast start to get killed off. One of the killer's signatures is that he cuts off his victim's fingers in the same way that Ray's are cut off.
Since we have arrived at the spoiler warning, it is time for us to recommend that you watch the movie in its entirety before viewing the rest of the video. If you want to use our drinking rules and come back, be our guest, as we will post them on screen now. With that out of the way, let's take an in-depth look at the rules.
First rule, as always, is death, and this time it came to 11 sips in total.
Generally more than we have for most movies, I'd say.
I'd say more than average. It's pretty rare that we get double digits for death.
Yeah, unless it's a slasher movie, which technically giallos are.
Yeah, exactly.
Some of the notable deaths in the movie didn't even happen from the killer. It happened from Cal, who admitted to killing one of the actors so he could get a better role in the movie.
Yeah.
And the detective who technically killed his wife, which he comedically tries to cover it up instead of explaining exactly what happened.
Yeah.
Moving on to the next rule, as always, is screams, cries, and yells. And again, if you hear any of these, you take a sip. And this came to a total of 23 in this drinking game.
I would cry. I would cry. I would never, ever stop crying.
Yeah, and there's, again, a good chunk of this. It's, I'd say, a little bit more than average, pretty close to average, but yeah, so far we're off to a good start with the drinking totals. Anyways, we'll move on to rule number 3, which is whenever you see strips of film or film reels, you take a drink, and this happened 14 times in the movie.
Yep, I feel like there's not too much to say about this. It's gonna be pretty common when obviously there's an editor in the movie, right?
The editing room is where you see them all too, and it cuts to there quite often, so...
Yeah. Let's move on to the next rule, which is whenever editing is mentioned. This came to a total of 13 sips.
You lost track of time again. Editing that crap.
It is my work. I must do it no matter how long it takes.
It's filth.
Yeah, and I think it's worth clarifying that we didn't count when the title, like, the editor was said, because that was said, like, probably twice as much as editing was mentioned, so it would have increased that a lot.
Yeah, it's editing, not the editor.
Moving on to rule number 5, it's whenever missing fingers are referenced, or shown, I guess. And this happened 15 times in the film.
Obviously, this kind of tries to tie the murders to Ray, whether it is him, isn't him. It never really comes full circle on why the killer does this for any real reason other than to pretty much frame Ray.
I think that's exactly what they were going for, is to frame Ray, because, you know, he's lost his fingers, and the what do you call it? The trademark, I call it, of the killer is to cut the fingers off the victims. I feel like they're just trying to frame Ray because of how his fingers are missing, so...
Yep, definitely. Moving on to rule number 6 is either nudity or sexually suggestive scenes, and this came to a total of 14 sips.
Yeah, there was quite a lot of this. Like, if it wasn't full-on nudity or having sex, it was like, you know, the girls dancing with their leotards or whatever they're wearing. Yeah. I don't know what you call them. Dancing in a very sexual way, or like, you know, there's innuendos thrown all over the place, and it was quite often.
Yeah, there was just naked people throughout the studios.
Yeah, true, walking around.
There was, I feel like a bit too much of this. A lot of it was, or I guess some of it, especially towards the end, is a little bit graphic. So a little bit of a trigger warning there.
Anyways, we'll move on to rule number 7. It's whenever red lighting is used, and this happened 18 times in the movie.
Yeah, I feel like the red lighting is just kind of a staple in giallo films, which ironically I found out that giallo means yellow in Italian, which I think comes from like the yellow like murder mystery books that they had in
yellow covers.
The yellow cover mystery books that they had at the time in Italy. So I feel like that's just kind of an interesting fact for the most part, but it's just weird that they use red lighting instead.
Instead of yellow.
Yeah.
It kind of seems like it contradicts it, but yeah. I mean, I guess I get it, because red, you know, it looks a lot more evil, or dark.
bloody,
Yeah.
whatever you
Actually, it's a good
adjective
way
here.
to make blood look more realistic too.
Mhm.
So that's probably another reason they use it. I will admit that Giallo films are one of my least knowledgeable. Like, it's something I haven't watched a lot of, but it's something I definitely kind of am interested in learning more about, because there's so many classic Giallo films that I just haven't got around to yet.
Oh, definitely. Let's move on to the next rule. That rule is whenever the masked killer is in frame, you take a sip, and that came to a total of 9 sips.
Yeah, and it's not just whenever his like full body is shown. It's more like even just his hand is in the frame with like a knife or a razor, or even just a shadow happens a few times. So it's not just whenever, you know, you see him as like a whole body in the shot. It's any part of him, really.
Yeah.
Moving on to rule number 9, it's whenever the editor hallucinates. This happens 8 times in the movie.
This happens a lot towards the end of the movie, and I feel like we were debating adding it as a rule, but at the end of the day, it just happened so much at the end that we felt like we had to.
Yeah, exactly. It didn't happen a whole lot, if at all, in the beginning. I don't think it happened at all in the beginning. Maybe in the middle, 1 or 2 times, but definitely in the end is when it happened a lot.
Yeah. Moving on to our final rule for this drinking game is whenever you see a tarantula, you take a sip. And this came to a total of 10 sips.
Yeah, it happened once in the beginning. This is another rule where it happened more in the end. It happens a lot in the end. There's more than one tarantula that comes into the picture, and Peter, I think he's hallucinating it.
Yeah.
Or if he's not, it's just a very weird scene where they're coming into the picture.
Just random tarantulas. I guess furthermore, there's a poster that's kind of hidden in the background.
In the editing room.
In the editing room. We only included it if it was like very, very plainly in sight. Like front and center.
Yeah,
sometimes it's off to the side and like basically a pass motion, like it's blurry in the background, so it's really hard to tell.
Yeah, once you know it's there, it's kind of easier to catch it and stuff, but we figured to make this, you know, easier to play, and you get to like actually pay more attention to the movie rather than focusing on the background completely. We just included it the one time. And that does it for all the drinking rules for this game. The total number of sips came to 135, which is the equivalent of drinking about 4.5 standard 12-ounce cans based off our 30 sip per can scale.
Yeah, I guess for the drinking game in general, the rules were fairly well balanced. Some scenes were definitely worse than others.
Oh yeah,
for sure. Not much else to say about that though.
Yeah, other than like they were like there was quite a lot of drinking, but it feels like most of the rules were, like you said, well balanced and pretty even across the board for the most part.
Yeah, there's nothing that was a full drink, so honestly that's pretty much a testament to itself.
Yeah, exactly.
So as we mentioned, we haven't seen a lot of Giallo films, but from what we gathered, they all seem pretty damn campy.
Yeah, and this one especially was very campy, and I feel like that was that was like the most entertaining part of the movie in my opinion. Like the shitty dialogue, for example.
What about you? You're wearing the same clothes also.
I'm an inspector, Ray. I have to wear the same clothes every day.
It's it's kind of like watching The Room in a way, because it's so bad it's funny.
Yeah.
But it was just like brilliantly on the nose. Like, I don't know, I feel like it was executed perfectly, just given the vibe of the film.
Yeah, I feel like the characters were very intentionally poorly written, but they're so perfectly poorly written.
Yeah.
And there's just some scenes that are really weird. So I guess, for instance, there's the characters, starting with Cal, who's like, there's one scene where he's just randomly gay for Peter.
Yeah. On the second rewatch, I will say I noticed that there was hints about that, because like in the shower scene, for example, Cal's like, he meets the other actor who he's like, oh, nice penis or whatever he says.
Yeah.
And like, oh, it's like, okay, that's a hint that he's gay. And then again later, when Peter hands him the razor in the car, they're talking about like, Cal wanted Peter to describe how he had sex with his ex-girlfriend.
Yeah.
To get that image in his head, I imagine. And I feel like that was kind of a hint too. And one more point to make about Cal is the scene where he kind of chases down Ray in his car and then pulls out a chainsaw and starts like threatening him with it and stuff. It was clearly he wasn't sane at all. No sane person would do that. But the funniest part about that is when he's describing it to Peter.
He's clearly a madman. Yes, a madman. I held a chainsaw right up to his face. He insulted me. That's not the behavior of a sane man.
Yeah,
It's
no
like-
sane person would like talk like that if they getting threatened by a chainsaw.
Yeah, exactly. When clearly he's the one that's not sane.
Yeah. Anyways, furthermore, the other characters, I think that take the cake a lot more Ray and Peter.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So Ray had this weird like French-Canadian accent, and to be fair, it is filmed in Canada.
Mhm.
I think Manitoba, Winnipeg.
Okay.
But anyways, some of the things like it takes a second for it to like register. It seems like English is definitely not his first language.
Yeah.
Like he enters his house and says,
Honey, I'm in our home.
Yeah. That was something that kind of like it goes along with the dialogue. It's just like it's so ridiculous, but it kind of got
Yeah.
a laugh out of me at the time. It was like just you wouldn't expect to hear that kind of word, like those words in that order. you know?
yeah. And again, it reminds me of The Room a little bit because it seems like Tommy Wiseau didn't know how to properly speak English.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. And I guess we'll talk about Ray a little bit more when we get to the ending because that's kind of his key piece to talk about. But for now, we'll move on to Peter. And I feel like Peter was my favorite character, probably you too.
Yeah, definitely.
He just had so many different characteristics and like, again, ridiculous, over-the-top traits about him as a character. And like, for example, he was clearly a very aggressive lover, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, we'll call him an aggressive lover to say the very least.
Slapping everybody he has sex with and like basically beating them kind of. But I don't know, it was something that the women were also completely into as well and like enjoying it. So
No, my favorite moment with him is when he's making love to, I think, his wife, and he put a blindfold around her, like, just after she lost her eyesight, so she's already blind.
Yeah.
So he's basically just doing fucking nothing.
and on top of that, it's also worth mentioning that the way that his wife became blind in the first place was she walked in on the two actors that were murdered.
Hysterical blindness. Not the first case I've seen, but it's not too common either. A woman's eyes weren't meant to see such things, you understand?
Is it permanent? Will she live that way forever?
It was like the doctor or whatever diagnosed her with hysterical blindness
Yeah.
and said like no woman should be seeing something like this because clearly it leads to blindness. And
Yeah.
again, it's something just so ridiculous and not believable, but yeah, it was it was again ridiculous when he put the blindfold on her. Everything about this movie was
I
ridiculous.
still love how he put the blindfold on.
Oh, it was
It's the
hilarious.
stupidest thing.
So we mentioned that we would talk about Ray a little bit more when we get to the ending, and now I guess is a good time to talk about it. So I thought early on that the wife or the assistant even, they both didn't exist and they were just a figment of Ray's imagination.
Yeah.
And we even see him hallucinating at the end, which you could still say is the case, but it's also hard to know because the ending is so confusing and
Yeah.
it could be left up to so many different interpretations.
Yeah. So my interpretation of the ending is that somehow editors are linked to the dark arts, whatever you want to call it, evil, the devil, I don't know. It has film wheels in the Necronomicon books, fucking who knows.
Yeah.
But my interpretation is that the editor is evil and he just played an optical illusion on Peter. But I have no idea. Like, it's so fucking weird.
It's also it also could be that Peter was like the madman all along, like because we see him at the end pulling that film strip at the end. That's how it closes the movie, and it's
Yeah.
like showing it in live action at that point. And like you said, the editor playing tricks on Peter. But it could also be the other way around, where Peter's actually the one doing everything and making everyone else believe that it's Ray, or the wife is what we're told. But yeah, it just ends. There's a lot going on at the end.
Yeah,
and
there's a lot going on.
I wasn't mad at the way it ended personally, but I was also just confused and trying to figure out what happened.
Yeah.
So after all that discussion about the ending and the characters, how ridiculous this movie is, what are your overall thoughts on it?
It felt more like a comedy than a horror movie. It was funny for all the wrong reasons, but obviously it was intended to be that way.
Yeah.
Super campy, a bit too much sometimes, and the sex scenes, again, a little too much for my liking. But all in all, I think it was a good movie.
Yeah. For me, I had a ton of fun with this movie. I found myself laughing out loud. Like you said, it's a comedy. It's a horror comedy. There's still horrific scenes. For example, there's a scene that comes out of nowhere where the actor, I forget his name, Claudio, they're acting in a movie, but he peels this girl's face off thinking it was a mask.
Yeah.
And then he just puts it back on, and then it cuts to the next scene of the movie, and she's just got a regular face
She's
again.
fine. Yeah.
And I thought that was funny, but also very gory, and it showed you everything in that scene, and I don't know. I thought it was shocking and hilarious at the same time. So stuff like that and the campiness is just stuff that I loved, and on-the-nose dialogue, like we mentioned. It was so ridiculous, but it was funny and kept me entertained the entire time. And I know I said this to you, but this is probably the most fun I've had with a movie this year, at least.
Yeah.
So I really love this movie, and I'm glad it was recommended to us.
Well, with our thoughts and opinions out of the way, let's move on to the award ceremony, where we award one not-so-lucky nominee the Darwin Award. This award goes out to a character that made a stupid decision that resulted in them getting killed, somebody else getting killed, or simply resulting in something bad happening that could have been easily avoided. This award can also be given out to a character that is just plain dumb. Here are the nominees.
Today's first nominee is Cal, for going overboard and threatening Ray with a chainsaw.
Next, we have Peter for accidentally killing his wife during a break-and-enter and making himself seem like the prime suspect.
Lastly, we have the assistant editor, Bella, for having a breakdown and confessing her love immediately after.
And the winner is Peter for making himself look like a suspect despite him doing nothing wrong up to this point. We will admit that he was messily able to trick the other guy into believing it wasn't him and even got him to grab the murder weapon. But in this case, he got lucky because the other guy was an idiot.
And with all that being said, we hope you enjoyed our look into The Editor, suggested to us by Horror Flicks with Nick. If you end up playing the game alongside the movie, or if you have any other feedback or suggestions, let us know in the comments below. Also, let us know in the comments what is your favorite moment from this wacky adventure of a movie.
Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next episode where we are going to be making a drinking game for Hereditary. We know this episode was a little bit late, so please forgive us. We just had some complications that we had to deal with throughout the last week or two here. But we're going to be going back to our regular schedule starting Friday here. So if you want to check out our most recent video, click on the box in the top right, or if you want to see a playlist of all the drinking games and movies we review, click on the box below it. Thanks for tuning in, and this is us saying, cheers to fears.